Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be having a look at how we can animate sidebars or just about anything else when we're using show and hide with Toddle. Now this app here was built in the 2025 Toddle Beginner's Guide, which I've got a link to in the description if you want to go and take a look at that. But anyway, so we've got an add button here to add a company. So when we click it, we get a form on the sidebar that pops out, and we can edit again with the form that pops out, but it's just shows and hides. It doesn't animate in any way, so it works, but it's not particularly elegant. So, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So over here we got our main companies component, and then within that we have our sidebar container, which is this here. This contains our form component. Okay, now if we wanted to animate this, traditionally what we would do is we would have a default style that would have a minimum width of 0, for example, and then we'd have another style that was based on some state to say whether it's showing or hiding, and then that would simply be the min width to 360, and then what we'd do is then have a transition which would then animate that process of it moving from width of 0 to 360 and back again. Okay, now we're not doing that here. We're using show and hide on the container, which is simply relying on a variable. And everything here, including the component for the form and everything, is relying on the fact that the show and hide is working, which loads and then unloads the section, the container from the page. It doesn't just hide it and show it again, it completely unloads it and reloads it onto the page, and we're relying on that effectively. So we don't want to obviously ruin that just to invoke an animation, so we need to find a way around it that works with show and hide. So let's have a look at this. So on our container, go into style, what we do is we can add a new style, and there's an option in Toddle that's relatively recent called starting style, and this uses under the hood it uses a standard CSS class as well. And so what starting style does essentially is to say, right, okay, with the page as standard, its beginning style is here, and anything you style then that's what the starting style is, and then when it's loaded based on show hide, then the default style kicks in. Now normally it's the other way around, which is the default style is the initial style, and then we have something else which we can move into based on a certain condition. So what we can do then as a starting style is we can come down here into transform, we can add one, and we can say, making sure that translate is selected by default, and in the X property we can then say that we want this to be 100%. Okay, and we can see what happens there is it immediately, we'll just click on it again, we can see that the container is moved 100% of its own width to the right hand side, which effectively moves it off the page. So by default then its starting style is not being displayed on the page. Okay, so when we do show hide, then the default one kicks in, that shows it, but now it's off the page, and so by default then the default doesn't have a translate, so that's going to be 0. So we can imagine then it's going to go from the starting position of this to then a position of that, and we then can add an animation to animate that process. So we come down here, go into transition, and I've got to make sure that I select the type of translate because that's the transition it's based on. I'm going to give it a delay of 50 milliseconds with the duration as the default. Okay, and so if we run that, that's going to work quite nicely for us. We click add, that's great, fine. Edit, that's fine as well. Okay, notice though when we close it we don't get the animation. Okay, so we're just getting the standard hiding of the the sidebar there. So we've got to find a way to add some animation when they close it. So how are we going to do this? Let's go back to our styles. So we've got a style at starting point, then we've got a default point. Now we need something to go back to. So we can't use a starting style, even though that would do ideally what we want because we've got 100% translate. But we're going to need a different style to deal with this because there's no such thing as an ending style. So what we need to do then is to add a new style. So we're going to need to add a new style class on that to be based on some condition, and we're going to need a state or a variable to deal with that. Like I say, it's a little bit of a faff, but it's going to work for us. So if we do now call this is closing, and we'll set that to the initial value of false. And so what we can do then is add a style class to this, and we'll call it closing, and then we'll activate it when the is closing variable becomes true. Okay, back in styling, we'll add that class. Okay, and so what we want to do is exactly what we do in the starting style, is to send it back to 100% transform so that it goes off the page again. Okay, we can see what happens there. So effectively what we want to be happening there is we've got a starting style of it off the page, it goes then to display on the page, and then the closing then puts it back over here. Okay, that's what we want. And then what we can do then is we then need to animate that process. So on the closing class selected, we can then have another transition, and we'll do the same thing. We've got to select that it's on the translate, duration 300 milliseconds, delay of 50 milliseconds. Okay, and so we're then going to move between those three styles: the starting style, the default, and the closing. Now we need something to activate this class, because at the minute it's relying on this, which is set to false. We need to set it to true to activate that style. So at the minute we've got our little X at the top there, if you can just about see it, and we've already got an event set on that for when they want to close it. So we click that, and we'll add a action to set our is closing to be true in this case. Now we've got a step already, which is to set the state, which is the show and hide is relying on. Now we can't have that in here, because if we just left it, it would close the sidebar straight away, and then that animation wouldn't kick in. So we're going to need to remove that from there, and we're going to need to deal with it in a different way. Okay, so let's give that a go now. Let's refresh, and let's click to add. That's great, and then we'll click to close. Yep, that animates as well. Click add again. Now it's not displaying at all. Okay, and the reason being is because we took the action step out of there, which was to set the state for the show and hide, is now it's not unloading that form, this container, off the page. So it's never unloading to then reload. So we're going to need to find a way to set that state for the show hide once the animation is complete, and also we do need to set this one to false to reset that again as well. Okay, so how can we do that? How can we get to the point where we can fire an event that once this style kicks in to start moving it off the page, once that animation is finished, we need to do something to set those states back again. And luckily Toddle gives us an event here. If we look under events, we can see animation, and then we get an event for transition end. So we've got a transition going on. Once it's finished, this event gets triggered, and then we can do something with it. So I'm just going to set those two variables. So our main open from sidebar state is going to then be, sorry, I don't need to do that. These are going to be set to be false. And then we can set our is closing state to be false as well. Okay, so that should do it for us. Where's already been? There we go. So yeah, that should work for us. By the way, I know it isn't going to work, but still, let's see where we get to. So let's refresh this. Click add. That's, oops. No, that's clearly not working. Okay, why is that not working for us? The reason being is we now put this transition end event on there, and then we're resetting our state. The problem is that gets triggered for every transition that we've got. And back in style, we've got two transitions going on. We've got a default one here, and then we've got one on closing. So what we need to do is to tell that transition end event only do those action steps when they're in the closing state. Okay, so let's go back to our event here. So we're going to need a switch on this. Okay, and then what we can do is to pick up our is closing variable, And then let's say that we're going to say that if is in closing. Okay, and then we're going to need to just shift these within that conditional. Okay, and so now the resetting of these variables is only going to happen when we're in the closing state, and that should work for us. Let's add, yep, that's fine. Close, yep, great. Can we do it again? Yep, no problem. Yep, absolutely fine. So now we've got our animation working within the context of using show and hide on here. Like I say, the closing bit is a little bit of a faff, but you can maybe wrap that in a component so that you don't need to do it every single time. But that certainly works for us. So I hope this was useful. I hope you enjoyed it and you got something from it. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the little bell icon. It all helps. But do what you're going to do. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.